Hello and welcome to week 5. So it's going by so fast, it's incredible. Well, I just got back from Georgia, Atlanta, Georgia, went to the big aquarium there, got my hammerhead shark hat here. So I would encourage all of you to go. The aquarium, the big tank at the aquarium, is the size of a football field. It is a very, very big fish tank. So here we are, week 5, looking at chapter 5, the second part of the A on ABC, the second antecedent chapter. We talked about environment on the first one. Now we're talking about communication. Now, both of these are elements of what we consider the ABC contingency theory. Now, I guess at this point, I would like to make the point that when we get into developing behavior plans, when we want to use the methods of behavior analysis, behavior management to modify your own or somebody else's behavior, it's important to recognize that it is a lot of work, very detailed, and you have to be very consistent. This is why it is very important that you choose your battles in order to do this kind of work, particularly if you're working on your own, or your children, or people around you. I mean, there are people that work in industries that use this all the time in early childhood education, sometimes working with people with disabilities and whatnot. They have to use these things all the time. They are tedious and they're exact. However, it's the tediousness and the exactness that makes them work. And we'll be getting into this kind of as we start to understand how do we create what I'm going to call the ABC statement or the ABC contingency statement. And it is a statement of the plan that encompasses the ABC that you are setting up, where you identify the circumstances under which the behavior is supposed to occur, the A, the consequences of that behavior occurring, to the criteria that you've identified, and the specific criteria for how we define the behavior that we are looking for. Right now, we're going to start talking a little bit about that A. So communication itself, just like we can look at everything from a behavioral point of view, we can look at a dialogue. You can look in a book, or you can look at a transcript of two people talking, and what you will see is a behavior. Somebody says something that is received as a stimulus by the other person, and depending on whether that individual likes or doesn't like what the person has said, they will come up with another statement or not talk at all. They may choose not to talk. So the stimulus exhibits a response, and the response goes back to the other person, and now that response is now a stimulus for the other person, who then comes up with a statement that is a stimulus, that is a response to that, and it becomes a stimulus for me. All of that. Meanwhile, at each one of those turning points, the statement is either a reinforcement of what my expectations are, or a non-reinforcement. It could be surprising, still positive, could be not what I'm looking for at all. I'll give you an example of how this works. If anybody has ever prepared to confront somebody, you're in your car on your way home, you need to talk to your partner about something that they did, and you're rehearsing. I'm going to say this, I'm going to say that, blah, blah, blah. And you get there, and you're like, okay, I'm all geared up for this. And you walk into the room and you say, we've got to talk. That alone is a stimulus that produces all kinds of behaviors. But let's say for the time being, okay, let's talk. And you say your first line. You have, because of your rehearsal, you have already determined what their line's for. You have a script. The problem is they don't have the script. So you say blah, 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 and they go blah, blah, blah. And it's not, and you're like, that's not what you're supposed to say. You're supposed to say this. I'm supposed to say you did this thing wrong. You're supposed to go, oh my God, thank you for pointing this out. I'm so lucky to have you to correct me and whatever. That's what they're supposed to say, right? But that doesn't necessarily happen. So sometimes arguments result, the negative emotions that are associated with an argument result because the other individual doesn't necessarily respond in the way that you would find reinforcing. That's why dialogues are so dynamic. Now, that said, you can still look at an existing dialogue, one that's already done, let alone having to deal with mixes of all this in the live setting. You can look at a transcript of a dialogue and you can see where the reinforcements and punishments are in terms of the ABC, antecedent, statement, behavior is what I'm going to say back. What's the consequence? Did the person listen to me? Did they respond? There's a very, very complex ABC going on there. All kinds of communication do this. So when we start looking at the other ways in which we communicate, when we communicate instructions, when we communicate with signs and whatnot, we have to understand that there's this assumption that the receiver, the recipient of this communication, is going to get what we intended and that they will respond in the way that we want them to. And essentially, the global job of any teacher is really to present you with information such that we can get into this sort of situation. I give you circumstances under which I'm asking you to represent your knowledge as best you know it, and you successfully do that, and I provide you feedback saying how great you are. That is it. It's an ABC exam. Almost all of learning is that way. Even if you're self-directing learning, even if you're watching TED Talks or something, and so like, I'm going to set some time to look at this. I look at it, I'm engaged, I'm listening, I'm looking things up if I don't understand them. And at the end, you get this sense of well-being of like, I just learned something new. ABC. Happening all over the place. So we end up, this part of the field of psychology with an offshoot, connections to educational psychology, really focus on the notion of assessment. Now, assessment is a term used to describe activities in which we engage in that purport to measure what you know. Now, for example, there are, it moves it into the behavioral world. Assessment moves the measurement of learning into the behavioral world because oftentimes the assessment is an indirect way of determining what you know. Consider the black box. I go to class, I listen to a bunch of stuff that's going on in class, I do some practice assignments and all whatnot. Then it comes to test time. Up until now, I've just experienced the class and whatnot and all the things and how it's processing inside of my mind. And we can't open the mind and look and say, oh, there's algebra. That's how you do a quadratic equation. That's not how it works. There's this mysterious box. There's all these planned activities to try and build things up in that box. And then we're going to test by having you do something that, depending on the how well the assessment is designed, it's supposed to indirectly measure what's going on inside the black box or inside of your brain. So if you're told to read a chapter, whatever that means, okay, that could just be skimming it, could be reading it for detail, could be reading, taking notes, could be reading, taking notes, looking stuff up, however you want to approach the depth of that. And then we design a series of questions that are supposed to determine whether or not you did a good job in learning that material, whether there's something permanent, that you take away the stimulus, and can you recall information? We have these assessments. So the B in the ABC contingency theory, in the classroom setting, the B's are all these tests that we do that indirectly measure what was going on inside of your head, which is the learning process. We very rarely directly measure learning. That would require an electro an EEG. It would require brain imaging where we would see connections in the neurons, and we know even then we just have a theoretical idea that connections between neurons means connections between concepts and ideas. That's an assumption. All of this, even including, is so mysterious. Learning is so mysterious that even including brain imaging, we're still looking at indirect measures of the process of learning. So assessment is that. How we set up the assessment, the questions that we ask, the hints that we give, the tools we allow people to use, all those A's have an incredible impact on how a person can demonstrate what they've learned. Okay, so it comes down when we're looking at some tests, like the test in this class. You come to an assessment. In here, the word assessment refers to all three different types of activity that you're encountering in this class. So you're encountering discussions, you're encountering quizzes, and you're encountering assignments. So here's what I do. In my discussions, what I'm actually, it's actually the instructions for that are you respond to my prompt and you respond to two other people's responses. There's a qualitative component. If you look in the grading rubric, there's a middle grade area where if you didn't really say a lot or you just gave the thumbs up or whatever, that's not enough. That's not what I'm looking for. But that, I'm going to tell you something, that doesn't measure learning at all. It doesn't measure it at all. What it measures is participation. Did you respond to my post? You might have got it all wrong. You might have said something irrelevant, and yet it still counts. Now, don't make a habit of that, but you might have, we're having a discussion, and what I'm actually grading is not learning. I'm grading your activity. You showed up, you posted these things, you responded to other people, and I'm assuming you read them. I'm assuming that you just based on your post, I'm assuming you read somebody else, just an indirect measure of that. So that doesn't actually measure learning. It measures activity in the class. That's why I call it the attendance grade. It's the attendance grade in online classes. Then we get to quizzes and assignment. Now, quizzes, generally speaking, is a application or a parroting of information. Now, since my classes all include online quizzes, you can look at the material, you can reword it, and you can answer the questions. Or you can apply the material and you can come up with an example of something that's in those quiz questions. And I give you the questions ahead of time, so there's no need for this to have been memorized. You can do this at any time of day, whatnot. And theoretically speaking, questionable as to whether those are really measuring learning. The quizzes actually are part of the process of learning by repetition. So if you've read something, you had to post it, and then now you've had to answer a question about that. Repeated exposure to that information, I hope, solidifies it in your memory. Then we come to the assignments themselves. Different than assessments. Assignments are these documents that I have you create. Getting a little bit closer, a little bit more detailed as to application, creativity. One of this is, what can you demonstrate in terms of that document? Tell me about what you're learning. Each one of these comes with instructions. The discussions come with the prompt and the expectations that you're going to respond once to me and that you're going to reply to at least two others. How clear that is, sometimes people have asked me if there's more than one discussion in a given week, do I have to reply to each one 3 times, or can 3 responses spread across 2 different discussions? Now, it's the first one. The answer to that is the first one, but it reveals a hole in the instructions. The instructions are not complete. They're not perfect because they elicit a very logical question. How I write the questions in the quizzes, quizzes they're sort of like investigations. I'm going to ask you something, and I'm going to put some words in there that trigger the material in your memory or tell you where to look for it. And then I'm going to ask you to do something with that. I'm going to ask you to apply that or give an example of that or explain it or define it in your own words or something like that. And so the degree to which I can give you cues within that statement plays a part in how well I will get what I want from you. And I, as an instructor, have to always balance, well, just how much do I give you in the question that will still allow you the opportunity to demonstrate learning? Like, don't want to give you too much information because then I've given you the answer. And the quizzes, that's how the quizzes work. Probably the one that is the most difficult is the assignments. And the assignments not only contain instructions and steps, but they contain a grading rubric, an actual disciplining component that determines my behavior. You're going to write the paper. The rubric determines my behavior. Whereas when I am grading you, you could have a really, 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 really crappy title page. And I can still only take 10 points from it. I can't take 20 points, even though it's really, really bad and I want to and I'm angry. Can't take those 20 points away because the discipline of the rubric tells me that's only worth 10 points. And then the other parts are only worth what they're worth. So I've had assignments given where the individual didn't understand the instructions or could not demonstrate the learning I was looking for, but they got credit for the writing, they got credit for the title page, so they didn't get a 0, they still got points because of that disciplining factor. Now, because you know the standard that I'm going to be using for my behavior, because I give you the grading rubric, that means you can go in and you can make sure that whatever you're submitting aligns with that grading rubric. Each one of those, the questions in the quiz and the format of the quizzes and the time frame in which they need to get done, the discussions and the availability all week, and the instructions for 1 and 2 posts, and the instructions within an assignment and the grading rubric are all part of the A, communications. How do we communicate to people what we want them to do in order to elicit that behavior? I then, and maybe you too, you do as well, I get these responses from my students, and if they meet the criteria, I'm assuming you learned something. It's still an assumption, but it's the best I have to go on. There are other ways to test within an online learning environment that's asynchronous, meaning we don't get together at in any specific time. Different ways of assessing, and so when you're taking a live class, sometimes people will call on you. That's the most, probably in all of education, probably the most stressful way of assessment, and that is the surprise question. It's also the most powerful, is to be able to get somebody to think on their feet and respond to a question. I don't think that's necessarily a good way to measure and grade somebody for their overall course or anything like that. But it can be a very, very powerful method of determining, keeping people on their feet, making sure people have the reading done, they're prepared for class and whatnot. We can have timed tests where you're isolated in a room without the ability to look at any resources. All of those are part of the A. Everything that you've ever experienced in education leading up until the performance on the test are all considered part of the A. Now, for the sake of when we apply this to an individual behavior, which is going to be kind of the focus of the major project, at least in this class, when you're defining your own behavior that you want to to create or to develop in your own lives. We're going to take this a little bit more simply. And I want you to look at page 80 in the course book. And what we have is the first part of a three-part sentence. The A. Next, we're going to look at the B's. And then later, we're going to look at the C's. So we look at the A's, and we're going to look, when we're looking at a specific behavior, keeping in mind that this whole thing that I've already talked about, keeping this in mind, when we're looking at a specific behavior, we want to give context within the A. So if we look at the actual document here, we see on the left-hand side here, see the when blank happens, do blank. It's sort of a generic form of this statement. I give you a whole list of them. Given 3 worksheets to complete, Billy will. Every Tuesday at 5 p.m., Sally will. Each time Hank meets with his one-on-one counselor, he will. Each day that homework is due, Mara will. Each morning after breakfast, I will. You see, there's a pattern here. There's, when is this going to happen? What's the triggering thing? The behavior plan has started. Is it every morning, every week, twice a week, three times a day, Monday, Thursday, Friday? Whatever it is that you are going to determine, that's the A part of this statement. So even when we're looking at, let's say, if we're going to put the discussion boards in this context for this class, it would say every week, given a prompt within the weekly discussion board, students will, 1, respond with a substantive prompt. This is the B, respond with a substantive response to the prompt, and reply substantively, well, maybe that's not even the word, sorry, to at least 2 other people. And if they've done that, they'll receive a 100% grade. That's when the grading rubric comes in. This is how that will be evaluated. That's the ABC statement, just like we just talked about in the book. So we look some more of these here. 3 times a week. Using the attached instructions on cleaning a room, Hannah will. Each time I feel angry, I will. All of these things, these are statements where we set up the A, and we're going to talk later about the B's. I want you to see how this is all the same. Even the complexity of an assignment description, the major special assignments or the assignments from chapter to chapter, this week you do all this stuff and then you perform. That's all part of the A. For behavior planning, we often use a series of statements like this, and we complete it with a definition of what the behavior is and the complexities that you're going to encounter with that, and then the complexities of the reinforcement or the consequences, possibly punishment as well. So that's how we write out the expectations of the behavior. So in order to assess your learning in this chapter, which in fact, I kind of focus on some other areas for now. We're going to be doing some ABCs later, where I'm going to be looking at your A's again. But for this week, we have a discussion on the clarity of instruction that you have had at school. Clarity or lack thereof. Where have you gotten an assignment, got a question, you don't, blah, blah, blah. And then, now, keeping in mind that sometimes, and I'll reflect on, I've had circumstances like this myself, I have posed a question that was unclear to the person that was supposed to answer the question, but it was unclear because they didn't do the reading. So if I assigned you a book to read in English Lit, and I say, what was the major cause of the angst between the 2 characters portrayed in chapter 7? And you would say, I don't understand what you're looking for. I didn't read chapter 7. That's different than a vague question. And so keep in mind, when we when we pursue designing the prompt to an assignment, there is always an assumption of previous knowledge. So I guess technically, assuming you've read chapter 7 might go right in front of that. Assuming you've read chapter 7, explain the angst between the two characters. That would be, that would expose the expectations that we have for prior knowledge. So, whew, lots of stuff in here. Now, so I want you to think about examples. You can use examples in this class. That's always fun when somebody critiques my class and say, I looked at this question, read all the material, and I still don't understand. That's actually really helpful for me. I really like getting that kind of stuff. Helps me refine, make sure, again, that balance between, am I giving you too much information and answering the question for you or anything like that, but asking about those things. Also, in this class, any class that you've got, that you've received, good and bad examples of clarity and instructions. The assignment, I'm actually kind of going a little, I like to add creative things to my classes. So in the world of training and performance engineering, which we're going to get to at the end of the class, it's a side hustle of mine. One of the things that we learn a lot about, very useful, are what we call job tools. The job tools are charts that show you what to do. You see them everywhere. Come up to a door that has a weird handle, there's a little label that tells you where to put your hand and whatnot. Go to the gas station and there's a little, shows the card going in, then it shows a finger on one of the buttons, and then it shows the gas being put in there. Notice too that when you go to the gas station, it shows a finger on the button. It always shows 3, right? And on the left is the low octane, and then you have the nitro on there. They always put the button on the 3rd one. It's a subtle way of suggesting maybe you want to press the 3rd button. Manipulators everywhere. So you have, what I want you to create is a job tool, a pictorial description describing how to do a task. And to do this creatively, either through, this would be, I challenge you to use AI on this if you want. Don't use it too much. Just make individual images with it, or don't go to AI and say, create a job tool for washing your hands. You can, but put a little bit more work into it. Or you can draw it out, or you can use something that you use with your kids, or how to clean their room, or a list, or a checklist, or something like that. So there's all kinds of job tools. Some of them don't even have pictures on it. Sometimes it's just an event list. Your to-do list is a job tool. Just then you put a little check mark next to each one of the things once you get them done, and it gives you a record of, we'll get into that, how important record keeping is later to make sure that things are actually getting done. Checklists are great for that. And but creating your own sort of, maybe it's a morning routine, maybe it's an exercise routine, maybe it's instructions for your kids to what they're supposed to do with their laundry every day, with little pictures and whatnot. As creative as you possibly can. I think some AI application could probably be helpful and creative in this. But remember, when you use AI, you're not creating anything new. You're just putting old things together in different ways. Not that that isn't creative, but it's not quite the same as having a human brain do it. That's my opinion. So I would rather see your hand-drawn one, take a picture with your phone, than an AI one. But it could be a really, really cool use of AI. So feel free. So discussion assignment. I will say also, I'm a little bit behind on grading. Last week was a kind of a weird week and ended up going to Atlanta for a few days, and I neglected you. So I will be catching up on grading this week, getting all the way back to chapter 3 assignment. and getting that all graded up until get us all caught up this week. So that's it. Kind of a long lecture, but it's been fun talking about this stuff. It always is. So have a great week. Take much care, and I will see you online.